If you are an American soldier in the Ardennes forest on the night of December 24, 1944, and you found yourself lost, bleeding, and separated from your unit in a blizzard, there was one thing you knew with absolute certainty about what would happen if you encountered German soldiers.
You knew because you had been told. You knew because you had seen. You knew because the preceding weeks had provided evidence so specific and so brutal that fear was not paranoia, it was the only rational response available to a man in your situation.
The Battle of the Bulge had begun 9 days earlier, on December 16th. The Germans had launched their largest offensive on the Western Front, through terrain everyone had considered impassable, the dense, snow-covered hills and forests of the Ardennes. In those 9 days, American units had been shattered, surrounded, and killed in numbers that had not been seen since the landings at Normandy. The 106th Infantry Division, caught in the initial assault, had lost approximately 8,000 men captured in a single engagement, the largest American surrender since Bataan.
The 28th Infantry Division had been torn apart across a 25-mile front. Bodies were freezing in the snow faster than anyone could reach them.
And then there was Malmedy. On December 17th, 1944, one day after the offensive began, members of Kampfgruppe Piper, the advanced armored column of the 1st SS Panzer Division, had captured approximately 84 American soldiers near the town of Malmedy, Belgium. The prisoners were disarmed and assembled in a field. Then the German unit opened fire on them with machine guns and pistols. Soldiers who survived the initial volley by lying still were executed individually as SS troopers walked through the bodies. 84 men were murdered. The Malmedy massacre had been reported through American military channels within hours. Every soldier in the Ardennes knew about it before the week was out. The message it sent was not subtle. It was not open to interpretation. It said with complete clarity that if you fell into German hands in this particular battle, in this particular forest, in this particular winter, the question of what would happen to you was not a question at all.
So when Fritz Vincken, 12 years old, peered through the frost-covered window of his family's isolated hunting cabin in the Hurtgen forest region near the Belgian-German border on the evening of December 24, 1944, and saw 3 figures stumbling through the snow toward the door, his first instinct was not sympathy.
His first instinct was to close the shutter and pretend no one was home. His mother did not let him. Elisabeth Vincken, 41 years old, had been living in that cabin with her son for months.
Her husband, Josef, was working in Aachen, 19 miles away, unable to reach them because the front had closed between them. The cabin sat in a clearing in the Hurtgen forest, a stretch of woodland that had already consumed tens of thousands of lives in fighting that preceded the Bulge.
The nearest town was several kilometers away. They were, for all practical purposes, alone in the middle of one of the most violent military engagements in the history of the European theater.
When the knock came, Elisabeth opened the door. The 3 men outside were American. One of them, a young soldier named Ralph Blank, was badly wounded, a shrapnel injury to his leg that had gone without proper treatment for at least 2 days.
The other 2 were supporting him, one on each side, their uniforms soaked through with snow, and their faces carried the particular expression of men who had given up expecting anything good to happen and were simply trying to survive until it stopped. They did not speak German. Elisabeth did not speak English, but she understood immediately what she was looking at, and she made a decision. She stepped aside and waved them in. She had just taken 3 enemy soldiers, enemy to her country, her government, her nation, into her home. She was a German woman in German territory in a German war. What she had just done was not, by any legal or political framework available to her, the obvious choice. But that was before she heard the second knock. Roughly an hour after the Americans had settled by the fire, Ralph Blank's leg elevated, Elisabeth beginning to prepare what food she had. There was another knock at the door. This one was different. It was not the tentative, desperate knock of men who expected to be turned away. It was a soldier's knock. Elisabeth opened the door to 4 German soldiers. They were Wehrmacht, not Waffen-SS. They were young,
all of them younger than she was by a decade or more.
They were also lost, also cold, and also, by the look of them, very tired of the war. Their leader, a corporal, spoke first. He told her they were looking for shelter for the night.
He was polite. He used the word bitte, please. Elisabeth looked at him for a moment. Then she said what she said. She told him he could come in.
She told him there were wounded Americans inside. And then she told him, a German corporal, in uniform, armed, in the middle of a battle in which his country was fighting for its survival, that there would be no shooting in her house. Not on Christmas Eve. The corporal stood in the doorway for a moment, that Elisabeth would later describe as the longest pause she had ever experienced in her life. The Americans inside the cabin had heard the exchange.
Ralph Blank, who could not stand without help, had no weapon that would have mattered. The other 2 American soldiers had their rifles, but were completely outnumbered. The 4 Germans at the door were armed, healthy, and technically in a position to do anything they wanted. The corporal stepped inside. He turned to his men and told them to stack their weapons by the door. The Americans looked at the Germans. The Germans looked at the Americans. Elisabeth Vincken, 41 years old, standing in her kitchen with a rooster she had just slaughtered and a pot of potatoes on the stove, looked at all of them. Then she told them to sit down. She had dinner to make. What happened next is documented. It is not legend, not reconstruction, not inference. Elisabeth Vincken told the story herself multiple times, and Fritz Vincken, the 12-year-old boy who watched everything from across the room, confirmed it in his own written account, published decades later. The corroborating details from both accounts align. Historians who have studied the episode have found no evidence of fabrication and substantial evidence of authenticity. Here is what they ate. Elisabeth had the rooster, a bird she had been saving, which she killed that evening. She had potatoes from her cellar. She had some canned goods she had accumulated over the preceding months. She stretched the meal across 7 men and 1 boy, and it was, by every account, enough. Not enough for a feast, but enough for a meal. Which is, in this context, extraordinary. The German soldiers included a medic. When he understood the situation with Ralph Blank's shrapnel wound, he asked Elisabeth's permission to treat it. She gave it. He cleaned and dressed the wound properly, the first time it had received proper medical attention. Ralph Blank's chances of surviving the next week, with gangrene already a possibility from the length of untreated infection, improved measurably in that hour. They ate together. There was, according to both Elisabeth and Fritz, almost no conversation in the conventional sense. The language barrier was too complete. But there was something else. Fritz, who was old enough to understand what he was watching, but young enough to watch it without the weight of ideology, remembered that the Germans helped the Americans to food, and that the Americans passed things to the Germans. Somewhere in the middle of the meal, the word Christmas was spoken in English, and then in German, Weihnachten, and both groups of men seemed to understand that they were using the same word. One of the German soldiers had a small bottle of wine he had been carrying. He put it on the table. He did not explain why he had been carrying it, where it had come from, or what he had intended to do with it. He simply put it there. Elisabeth found cups. They drank. After the meal, the soldiers slept. Germans on one side of the cabin, Americans on the other, with Fritz somewhere between them, watching. Elisabeth did not sleep. She sat by the fire for most of the night, listening to the men breathe, feeding the wood stove. At some point between midnight and dawn on December 25, 1944, the cabin in the Hurtgen forest contained 7 armed soldiers from 2 countries who were trying to kill each other, and nobody shot anyone, and everyone slept. In the morning, when the first light came through the frosted windows, the German corporal produced a compass. He found the American soldiers and showed them, on the ground, using a stick scratched in the snow beside the cabin door, which direction they needed to walk to find their own lines. He was precise about this. He gave them a heading that would take them away from active German positions. He did this without being asked. He did this for men whose country he was fighting against. In the middle of a battle his country was losing. On Christmas morning. Then the Germans walked north. The Americans walked south. Ralph Blank was supported between his 2 companions.
his leg properly dressed for the first time since he was hit.
Elisabeth Vincken went back inside and closed the door. She kept the rooster's feathers. This is documented. Fritz mentioned it specifically in his account.
He said she swept them up carefully and kept them in a small container for years afterward. Not for any practical reason, simply because they were what remained of that night.
The rooster's feathers are the memory artifact here, the most ordinary possible object, the byproduct of the most mundane domestic act, elevated by the extraordinary context into the only physical proof of what had happened.
Elisabeth Vincken, who had sheltered enemies in her home and told an armed German soldier there would be no shooting on Christmas Eve, kept a handful of feathers. She kept them because something had happened that she did not have words for.
And the feathers were the only evidence. Fritz Vincken grew up. He immigrated to Hawaii in the 1950s. He became a baker, married, and had children. He carried the story with him for years, telling it occasionally to people close to him, not entirely sure whether it would be believed or what it meant in the larger accounting of the war. In 1995, 50 years after the battle, he published his account in Reader's Digest. The response was immediate and significant. Letters came from veterans who had been in the Ardennes. Some of them, a handful, believed they might have been among the Americans at that door, though the specifics of wartime movement made it impossible to confirm with certainty. What the letters confirmed was the story's texture. The details were consistent with what soldiers on both sides remembered about that period, that forest, that particular terrible winter. Now, let me show you what Ralph Blank's survival actually meant in the context of that week. The Battle of the Bulge ran from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. American casualties across the entire engagement were 75,482 men, killed, wounded, or captured. The Hurtgen forest fighting, which overlapped with and preceded the Bulge, had already consumed another 33,000 American casualties before the German offensive even began. The winter of 1944 in the Ardennes was the single most costly period for American forces in the European theater. In that context, 3 American soldiers lost in the forest on Christmas Eve, one of them wounded and developing an infection, with German forces between them and their own lines, had a specific and calculable probability of survival. But here is the irony that changes the accounting entirely. Let me show you what happened to the American units that didn't get lost. The 106th Infantry Division, which held the line when the German offensive hit, suffered catastrophic losses in the initial assault. The 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments were surrounded in order to break out, and failed. Of approximately 8,500 men in the 2 regiments, more than 6,000 were captured. Many of those captured were then marched across Germany in the brutal winter with inadequate food and inadequate clothing, and a significant number died in captivity before the war ended. The men who were at their posts, who were doing everything right, who were following orders and holding the line, those men were captured, marched, and many of them did not survive. Ralph Blank and his companions had been separated from their unit in a way that was, in the moment, terrifying and disorienting, and almost certainly felt like failure. They were lost. They were cut off. They were useless to the war effort on the night of December 24th. They stumbled through a snowstorm and knocked on a German woman's door and were lucky she opened it. But their uselessness that night, their separation, their lostness, it meant they were not at the position their regiment was holding when the Germans came through it. Their apparent misfortune was the precise mechanism by which they survived the battle. The thing they feared most, being cut off, alone, unable to fight, turned out to be the thing that saved them. There was one more piece of this story that matters, and it belongs not to the soldiers, but to Elisabeth Vincken. After the war, she was asked, at various points across the decades, why she had done what she did. Why had she told an armed German soldier, in the middle of a German battle, in her German home, that there would be no shooting? Why had she let the enemies of her country eat at her table, sleep under her roof, and leave the next morning with a compass heading toward their own lines? Her answer was not political. It was not ideological. It was not even, in the conventional sense, moral. She did not invoke rules or principles or abstract rights.
What she said, in the various forms she said it across decades of retelling, was approximately this. They were boys.
They were cold. It was Christmas. She had food. That's the answer.
Not we're all the same, because they weren't, and she knew it, and the corporal knew it, and Ralph Blank knew it, and every one of them would return the next morning to a war that would continue for another 5 months and kill hundreds of thousands more people. Not a resolution to the conflict, not a transformation, not a lesson learned by an army or a nation. Just a woman who looked at 7 cold soldiers and made dinner. And this is what the empathy paradox actually looks like in the historical record. It doesn't look like reconciliation. It doesn't look like ideology defeated. It doesn't look like proof that war is wrong, or that human beings are fundamentally kind, or that things work out in the end. What it looks like is much smaller and much more durable than any of those things.
It looks like a 12-year-old boy watching Germans and Americans eat from the same pot, a German medic wrapping an American soldier's wound, a corporal giving away his compass heading to the enemy, and a woman keeping a jar of rooster feathers for years because they were the only physical proof of the night nobody shot anybody.
What the historical record shows, in this case and in the dozens of documented similar cases across the Second World War, is that institutional dehumanization, the systematic suppression of empathy that war requires in order to function, is never total.
It cannot be made total. Individual human beings, placed in specific proximity to other individual human beings, under specific conditions, will sometimes do the thing the institution is designed to prevent them from doing. They will recognize each other.
They will act on that recognition. And the recognition, once it occurs, cannot be entirely erased. Not by the resumption of the war the next morning, not by the decades that follow, not by the weight of ideology or national identity or military necessity.
Fritz Vincken carried that night inside him from 1944 to 2002, when he died in Honolulu at the age of 69. He told the story because he believed it was worth telling, not because it changed the war.
Not because it made anything right, but because it happened, and because things that happened deserve to be in the record, and because the record of what human beings are capable of, even at their worst, even in the worst conditions, should include the evidence of what they are also capable of. The Malmedy massacre happened. That is also in the record. Both things are true simultaneously, and neither one cancels the other. The only honest response to both is to hold them together without flinching. Here is my question for you.
Does anyone in your family have a story like this? A moment from wartime? Any war, where a soldier showed unexpected humanity to an enemy? Or where enemies found themselves briefly on the same side of something more basic than the conflict?
A family story that does not quite fit the official narrative of how those wars are remembered? Drop it in the comments. These stories are the most fragile part of the historical record. They live in families, in letters, in the memories of people who are getting older, and they disappear when they are not spoken.
If you have one, speak it. If this changed how you think about what the war record contains, hit that like button and subscribe. We find these stories and put them in the record where they belong. Thanks for watching.